What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I have an old hammer that I got from my grandfather that looks a little worse for wear. It's got a bit of a misshapen face, got a lot of chips and things missing from the face. I have no idea what it was originally used for, and I thought that today I would test myself in my ability to fix this thing up and give this hammer a new life. So, without any further ado, let's get rocking. It is absolutely a serviceable, usable hammer, but as you can tell, it's got a lot of spots where steel is chipped off, and as you can see, it looks like it's been cobbled together. And I don't know if this was my grandfather's method of wedging this thing on the handle. The nails are an interesting choice, but what I want to do with this hammer is drift the eye a little bit bigger and then turn this into a square circle rounding hammer. But the first step in working on this hammer is to get this handle off, so let's get to work on that. All right, so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna try to get these nails out, and it's amazingly wedged pretty well with just a couple of old nails, but I don't know how far down those go, and I don't really want to take a saw to this yet and risk, damaging one of my nice wood saws by cutting into a nail. So I'm gonna, at the very least, try to get these nails out first and then try to punch it out of the eye. I'm gonna have to try to chisel into the wood here under the nail heads. Use my pocket knife to dig out the rest of the wood underneath the nail head. Hey. And nail number 2. All right, so now that I've got the hammer handle out of the eye of this hammer, it's very apparent that one side of the eye is much thicker than the other one. And I think just looking at it, given the hammer marks and the kind of variation of the surface and all of that, this is a homemade hammer. And it's pretty apparent that the eye was punched off center from whatever stock they started with. I made much the same mistake on my handled chisel, and you can find that video, one of these corners. When I was punching the hole, it's very easy, especially with a slot punch, to get off center. And you're just kind of stuck with where it is. There are ways to kind of deal with this, but I've been talking long enough. The first step I'm actually going to do is take it to the grinder and grind out a lot of these chips and a little bit of mushrooming on the head, because I don't want it to grow any cracks while I'm hammering on this thing, which unfortunately means I'm going to be losing a bit of mass on this hammer. I'm gonna go weigh this now that I think about it, just to see what we're starting with, and I'll weigh it at the end once I've made all of my modifications and see where it shakes out after all of this process. I got partway through grinding this thing and I just remembered that I was planning to weigh this thing. Even though I've done a little bit of grinding here on this face, the hammer is currently 2.048 pounds. All right, so the first thing that I'm doing here, or what I'm working on here, is just grinding out this little divot that's in one of the faces of the hammer, which is why I just continue to grind on this face for a while. In the grand scheme of things, this probably will end up getting hammered out anyway, but I want to make sure that there's nothing that could grow a crack on this hammer while I'm hammering on it and developing it into the hammer that I actually want. In the process of grinding this, I believe I have found 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 different cracks, mostly along the diagonal edges. And that concerns me about the structural integrity of this hammer itself, which is honestly a shame, because this could end up being an absolute failure of a project just because I won't be able to forge it or heat treat it without it cracking further. My goal here is I'm just gonna try to grind out all of these cracks. I might lose a lot of mass in this hammer if I do that, but I think that's going to be the only way that I'm going to actually get anything out of this hammer project, and video for that matter. I ended up taking a lot of material off that end. So please take this to heart. Make sure you care for your tools, because if you do, they will last you a long time. And if you don't, when you try to correct it, you will lose way more material trying to correct it than you would have if you just maintained your tools to begin with. All right, so I have got the faces cleaned up as best I can. Obviously, there's still a lot of kind of misshapenness going on with this hammer, but it is time to move beyond the grinding, initial grinding phase at the very least, and I'm going to toss it in the forge and start drifting this eye a little bit bigger. First thing I'm going to do, pour some water on one side. And I'm running it down the inside of the eye. Holy cow, that is hot. All right, that should be enough. You can see one side is a little darker than the other. Drop that drift in there. That started making some progress, but really on just the corners, because this is more square than this eye. And I eventually want this to get a little bit longer because I want more handle inside the eye of that hammer. But we're going to keep going, and we're just going to keep swapping sides as I try to drift this hole out to make this eye more of an hourglass shape in order to hold the handle better. Thing is difficult at best to get off the drift. So far it's looking all right. I'm going to do one more heat where I actually cool that side, and we'll go ahead and drift the other side, because as you may be able to tell, that hole is smaller than that hole, which is good because I need to drift this side, and that'll create an hourglass shape to the eye, which is something we want in a hammer because, and I'll use the shape of the tongs here. The piece of wood, this is very exaggerated, but that taper, right, is what we're looking for through the eye. And if we're going in this direction, we want it to be skinny enough to fit through the eye and then have the eye sit on the wood so that it won't move further down the handle. And then when we go and drive that wedge in, it'll spread this portion of the wood out into that to fill that hourglass shape and make this a really nice fit up, as long as we have that kind of hourglass shape already pre-built into the eye. Is that a crack? Oh my goodness. All right, so I've already got a crack growing. A little crack starting to develop right there. And I am almost certain that A, there was probably an existing crack that I didn't grind out there. But B, at least the first couple of times I was trying to get the eye to release from the drift, I was hammering pretty hard on this face while it was cold. And that was obviously a bad idea. So I need to be careful and not do that. I'm gonna go grind this out and get it back in the fire. And I've got that eye spread a bit more. I think I'm going to stop coming in with the water, and I need to focus on getting this thing straightened, because I keep finding that the drift is crooked one direction or another pretty much every time I come out, and I think I need to drift that as high up as possible to just even that all out. It's still very angled, unfortunately, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to fix that myself. Ironically, the drifting process is squaring this out for me, which is kind of nice. So I'm gonna come back and drift that direction next, and hopefully that'll kind of square everything up, and we'll be able to move on to the next step here. Trying to hammer at an angle here to correct the angle that I'm getting through the piece. I may have to readjust the square of this hammer, like what is considered square. By forging down on these sides in order to readjust square back to in line with the actual drift. I think I'm going to switch to just hammer work on this for the time being, stop drifting it, because I think I've drifted the eye to the point where I need it to be. And I think I just need to hammer it into submission and get the shape that I want out of it. And I'll show you how hot this drift gets. I think that's about where I want it. Now I think I'm going to come in and go ahead and forge down on those diagonals and not bring this to a octagon, because I want the faces to be pretty square, but just knock those down and add a little less variation to all of those diagonals. Wow, this hammer is putting out a lot of heat. Man. As expected, but... Alright, so it's looking pretty alright there. There's obviously some variation that'll get worked out on the grinder. But in the grand scheme of things, I think I'm doing pretty okay. Especially for this being the first time I've really attempted any kind of hammer work in the slightest. So I'm going to count this as a win so far. The next step is to put it back in the fire, and then I'm going to drift this hole again. And then I'm going to bring it back to the flat face of the anvil and hammer on the cheeks and try to spread those laterally, or I guess up and down in relation to where the hammer will be. All right, so I think as I get through this, I'm realizing that I want to kind of separate where I'm actually spreading this. And as such, I'm gonna bring my guillotine tool and start fullering in near the faces before I start spreading this any further, so I can give myself kind of a cutoff for how far I wanna actually spread it. All right, so this is obviously a bit, that's not gonna work at all, is it? Okay, scratch that plan. What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I'm going to be forging a simple spring fuller. Alright, with that little detour out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and step this off about 1/2 inch. You got to get the steel plenty hot just to get even a divot or a mark in there. So back in the fire it is. I'm just going to turn this thing over again and again just to make sure I'm getting an even pressure. Getting the grooves established is the hardest part here. So we'll move on to the other side here. Oh, and we'll mess it up. All right, so I found some spots that I was out of alignment in. So I'm going to use my handheld fuller just to try to correct some of those. And I'm just striking it at an angle so that I can drive the steel that's out of alignment back into alignment. All right, I'm thinking that is where I'm going to leave it. Now, to figure out how to get the diagonals forged in on this. Okay, not too bad. Uh-oh. I think I've officially broken my spring fuller. I'm beginning to think that I made this out of wrought iron and not just a random scrap piece of steel like I originally thought. But we're going to continue using this poor spring fuller on its last legs and get the corners knocked in on the other end of the hammer, and then we'll get back to truing up the eye as best we can and working on the cheeks. Alrighty, I think I have finally gotten it to where I'm happy with it. It's only taken me, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours just to get those fullers in there. I may not be doing this by hand ever again. The next step I'm going to do is bring it back to the hardy hole and pound the drift back into the eye on both sides just to reestablish, because I've gotten some deformation in the eye just based on all the forces going on. So let's keep on rocking. Now that I've drifted both directions through that eye, I'm going to drift through one side and get my crosspeen hammer and forge on that kind of uphill, or the portion of the cheeks that are in contact with the thicker portion of the drift. And that's to avoid collapsing the eye on the other side. But I want to spread the steel that direction in order to give it a little more shape and a little more style. And we'll see how I can manage that. Now, as you can see, my spring fuller has made a return. Scale. And as we go, you will see that as the cheeks spread, I need it to actually sit on the arms of the spring fuller in those grooves where I got the fuller marks, so it doesn't smash the spread steel back flat when I go to do the opposite side. Looks like I'm going to have a weird shape to that one, to that cheek in particular, based on the material that I had remaining in the hammer. But in the grand scheme of things are working out all right. And it was completely by accident that this ended up wide enough to work for this. One side is looking way better than the other. That's all right. I'm going to probably do some just grinding to make the shape look a little bit better in the long run. And that will be the main bulk of the forging process of this hammer. So I'm going to let that cool down, and we're going to get to the grinder, and probably tomorrow, because it is 90 degrees in my garage and I am tuckered out. It's a lot of steel to move by hand. Alrighty, so it is the next day, and I realized this morning that I should probably do an annealing cycle on that hammerhead before I carry on any further. Now, annealing is a process by which I am softening the steel, but it is also doing something really important for me. Steel is a crystalline structure, meaning it is a material made out of atoms in a lattice. Now, during the forging process, that lattice, that crystal structure is smashed and disjointed and bent all out of shape because of, hammering on it with a hammer. And that creates a lot of stress in the material. And stress is one of the key components of generating cracks in a piece of steel. Now we obviously don't want cracks, especially on something that's going to see a lot of heavy pounding and a lot of cyclic stresses, which is another key component of growing cracks in a piece of steel. And as such, I want to eliminate as much of that stress as I can. And I'm going to do that by way of an annealing cycle, or 2 or 3. Now what the annealing process actually does is allow all of the disjointedness of the crystal structure to kind of relax. It regrows the grain structure to a better structure so that everything is kind of back into alignment in the steel, and it relieves a lot of that stress. Now, the way that I'm doing this is I'm bringing the hammerhead up to critical temperature, which is the temperature that steel is no longer magnetic at. And then I'm going to bury it in some wood ash that I have just in a fire pit that I brought inside. What this wood ash is going to do is provide a barrier of thermal insulation to avoid heat transfer out from the hammer to the maximum extent possible so that it cools down as slowly as I can get it. Now this very slow cooling is what actually forces the steel grain structure to kind of shrink and realign itself and relax all of that stress. And as such, I want to make sure that I do this at least once or twice so that I can eliminate the vast majority of the risk of developing cracks in this hammer throughout its lifetime. All right, so now that I've got the hammerhead buried in the ash, I'm going to let that cool down slowly, and we'll see you at the grinder. Alrighty, so it is fully annealed this time, and we are getting to the grinder. And first thing I'm going to do is just start grinding up the faces. I'm going to get this side just kind of a nice flat and then round off the corners. And then this side is going to become the rounding face. So it needs a lot of grinding. So let's keep on rocking. This is not cutting it to get through the forge scale, so what I'm going to do is switch to a different grinder. I'm going to use these grinding stones on this bench grinder to get through the forge scale before going back to the belt. Alrighty, so this thing is looking pretty darn good so far, if I do say so myself. It still could use some refinement, but I think I'm past the major hogging off of material. So we're gonna move on to refining up all of these fullers with my Dremel, and then get back to the belt grinder for refining the shape and getting everything down to a decent polish before heat treat. And I'm just taking that to the fullers here to grind out any of the discontinuities and abnormalities in the steel that I put in with the sharp corner of the disc on the bench grinder. And then I'm going to take it in here and refine the inside of the eye itself. There's a little spot where the drift didn't fully square up one end of the eye closest to the flat face, and I want to just grind the kind of corners to a more rounded shape to kind of get things back to normal. And this will give me the opportunity to kind of correct the alignment of the eye itself with the hammer, try to bring that back in line with the actual body of the hammer itself. And once the fullers are all ground in, I'll move back to the belt grinder and kind of polish up the faces and all of the surfaces and everything that are shined up, and refine the overall shape of the cheeks, get rid of those sharp corners, and all in all just kind of finish everything up, and then we'll move on to the heat treatment process. Alright, well, I could continue grinding on this all day, but I wanted to do a check-in on the weight before I put it in the fire to heat treat. Looks like we are sitting at precisely 1.6 pounds. So, significant loss of material, obviously, but I think it is very nice looking compared to what it started out as. So I think we are ready to move on to the heat treatment. So I'm going to fire up the forge and really slowly bring this hammerhead up to that critical temperature that I was talking about before the annealing process. Now, before I get too far ahead of myself, I am going to put the drift back in here very lightly because I don't want to change the shape of the eye at this point, but I do want to put my touch mark in before I heat treat. to simply stamp that it is now something made by Rocking E Forge. Once I am done stamping this with my touch mark, I am going to move on to the heat treatment process, and I will start that by heating the hammerhead up to that critical temperature, or the point where the steel is no longer magnetic. And I'm going to be continually pulling it out of the fire and touching this thing against the magnet. And once it has reached non-magnetic, I want it to get just a little bit hotter before I quench this thing in water. Now, I don't know what steel this is, given I started out with a pre-made hammer, and as such, I don't know what the actual heat treatment properties of this steel are, but in applications this thick, not knife related, I'm a little less concerned about quenching an unknown steel in water. Now I'm just going to really briefly grind off the forge scale off the faces here, and then I'm going to get it into my 400-degree preheated toaster oven to do one of 2 tempering cycles. But I've got a brick in there so that it helps prevent major swings in temperature in the toaster oven, so that it maintains a more solid tempering temperature for this hammer. And now that the heat treat and temper is complete, I'm gonna go back to the grinder and polish this baby up, and then we will get a handle on this thing and we'll be finished. I just ended up buying a sledge handle from a hardware store, and I'm just gonna use a nice sharp file to file off the wood on the sides here. It looks like it is almost the right size. It just needs to be skinnied down a little bit, so I'm taking just a little bit of wood off the sides with this file, this round file here. And now it's time to hang this hammer on this handle. You'll notice this is very thick, completely unfinished. It's still got the sticker on it for that matter. And that's because I'm going to shape this while the hammerhead is on it. The eye is not perfect, and I'm looking dead up and down with the oblong shape of the hammer, or the handle. And as you can see, the hammer head is angled a little bit. And so shaping the handle while the head is actually hung and wedged in there already gives me the chance to shape it to bring it back in line with the hammer handle. If I had done that before hanging the head on the handle, it would have been twisted. And once again, I've got my trusty half an axe handle. If you are a woodworker and want to send me a wooden mallet, let me know in the comments section. And that is not coming off. So we're gonna get a wedge in this thing and then shape this handle to final shape. And this hammer will be ready for use once I do a little burn on the handle. So let's get this thing wedged up. I got this thing about as covered in glue as I possibly can. And that is all wedged on there. And burning this handle is purely aesthetic. There's nothing structural or anything fancy going on with the handle itself. I just want to darken the wood a little bit and make it look a little nice and similar to my other hammers. All right, so I've had this thing soaking in boiled linseed oil for a couple of minutes. That oil will help prevent rust on the hammerhead itself, which is why I soaked the whole thing in it. I'm gonna wipe down the handle to just spread that linseed oil around the handle. I really like the way this burn turned out with kind of the light and dark contrast coloration going on here. And I just wanted the linseed oil to soak into the handle a little bit. That will help kind of expand the wood a little bit more in the eye, make sure I've got a good solid fit up, and hydrate the wood after that burn. I've heard of people soaking their hammer handles in antifreeze as well to do the same thing. I just have boiled linseed oil in a container on my workbench from one of the last projects I did. But this will help kind of seal the handle, prevent excess moisture from getting to it and it from warping and all that stuff. And it does color the wood a little bit and make it look a little nicer as well. Once I've got this all massaged into the wood and soaked in as much as possible, I'll go ahead and wipe everything down with a shop towel, and we'll be ready to fire up the forge and use this thing for the first time. This is so satisfying. I am darn proud of how this turned out. I got the face all broke in already, and my goodness, I am so happy with the way this thing turned out. And I hope that this project inspires you to get out to your shop. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, or ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video, or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rockin'.